as soon as I fell, someone was made aware, and then like the competition stopped. Like, and people who were not medical or didn't have, CPR training were ushered outside. So the rest of the spectators were in the parking lot. And then, someone was checking my femoral pulse. Someone was, administering CPR. Someone was giving me mouth to mouth. A couple firefighters in attendance put the AED on me. And it seemed like everyone was very siloed, but working together in getting the best outcome possible, which, I'm just like so grateful that these people were in attendance. Like someone was watching over me that day because, like only in a CrossFit gym, right? Like that you're able to have such a great community of people who are working together, who really just probably met each other for the first time that day.
Hello, and welcome to Pursuing Health. I'm Dr. Julie Fouché, family physician and former CrossFit Games athlete. Here, I bring you information and inspiration to help bridge the gap between fitness and medicine and support your journey toward your healthiest self. Thank you so much for joining me. Now let's get started with this week's episode. Welcome to Pursuing Health. I am very excited for this episode today. It's a little bit of a different episode. I have two guests. So today I'm joined by Jason Wang, who is a 33-year-old who's been doing CrossFit for over 10 years and recently suffered a sudden cardiac arrest at the AI Southside Brawl in Calgary, Alberta. So I am so grateful to meet you and for you to be here to join us today, Jason, and to share your story with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And we are also joined today by Dr. Amer Johri, who also does CrossFit, and he is a cardiologist. He's an associate professor of cardiology at Queen's University and is going to share some perspective for us as well as a cardiologist. So thank you for joining us also, Dr. Johri.
Thanks, Julie, and Jason. Thanks for allowing me to be here today.
Awesome. So I would love to just start, Jason, with you. I know you've been an athlete for your whole life. You were a collegiate basketball player. You started doing CrossFit in 2011 and have been no slouch either. You've competed along the way. You were on a team at regionals in the past. So you are a lifelong athlete. My question before we dive into the recent events is, did you ever have any prior indication that there was maybe something going on with your heart?
Nothing in my past, and no warning or trigger signs that would ever give me an inkling that something like this would happen.
Okay. And so then I'd love to hear just a little bit about the recent events. So first of all, you decided to compete in the AI Southside Brawl. What motivated you to sign up? Are you someone who competes in a lot of competitions, or what was your decision for doing it that day?
So I typically try to do 2 to 3 competitions a year, including the Open.
Okay.
And it's a good way to, immerse myself in the community, see a lot of longtime friends. And this competition, the AI South competition, was almost 2 years in the making because I had registered in March of 2020. And then subsequently, the world kind of shut down. And we all got our money back, and I was really excited to compete in 2022 after 2 years of waiting with a new partner. So it was a partner competition, and we were super excited, and we were doing really well during the weekend. So I was pushing myself pretty hard, and my partner was really carrying me throughout that time.
That's awesome, and I can imagine it was really exciting to finally be back with the CrossFit community in person and at a competition. And there's probably a lot of positive energy there. How were you feeling? You said it was going well. How were you feeling prior to the competition? And then can you lead us through the events of what happened on May 15th?
Sounds good. Yeah. So it was a 2-day event. So Saturday, there were 3 events. And then Sunday, there were 3 events as well.
Okay. Saturday,
competed and did really well, and I think we were sitting in 4th or 5th place on after Saturday. And then my parents had come into town on Sunday morning because I recently purchased a house.
Oh,
and they
congratulations!
Oh, thank you. And to get involved with the inspection and the closing of it. So I picked them up from the Calgary International Airport. They're from Ottawa that Sunday morning. And I asked my dad, I was like, do you want to come watch the CrossFit competition? And he was like, you know what? I'm a little tired. I think I'll skip it this time. And I was like, okay, that's cool. So I drove to AI South after dropping off my parents at my apartment, did 2 events. And after that, I think we were sitting in 4th.
Okay.
So the last event was coming up, which was kind of like a fight gone bad style workout, whereas, you go and then your partner takes off where you left off.
Okay.
And it was for 4 rounds each. And then after my 3rd round, I just felt pretty tired, like any typical event. And I went to go tag my partner, and then I just don't remember anything.
Wow.
And then when I came to, a nice lady had her hands around my face, and she's like, Jason, just keep breathing. You're with us. Wow. And I looked around and I was like, where's my shirt? And then I looked down at my chest, and I had 2 pads on my chest, and the gym was packed. And then when I, swiveled my head, the gym was kind of cleared. It was 10 people in the gym. Some people were crying. I was like, what's going on? How do we do, in the event?
You're like, how did we finish? That was your first question.
Yeah.
Wow.
And people were like, hey, stay down. And then someone was like, Jason, your heart stopped, and the AD had to shock you twice.
Wow.
So that was a lot to take in. And my second reaction was, hey, my parents are in town. I'm buying a house this week. You think, do I really need to go to the hospital? And luckily, there were a lot of medical professionals. Every second and third person at the event was, a paramedic, firefighter, nurse, doctor. And they're like, we highly suggest you go to the hospital. And then, so the ambulance took me to the Foothills Medical Center, which is where the cardiovascular specialty treatment center is in Calgary.
Which I also heard that you actually walked yourself to the ambulance. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I was like, I'm able to walk on my own 2 feet, walked myself to the stretcher, and then they carted me, and the gym was cleared. So I saw all these people in the parking lot who were, giving me almost like a round of applause to see I was
wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got to the hospital. I didn't have my phone or anything. And luckily a good friend of mine had, taken my phone and my backpack to the hospital. And when I got my cell phone, it was thousands of text messages being like, Jason, please answer this. Tell me you're okay. And I was like, what's going on? And then that's when I started piecing together what had happened. And my parents luckily got to the hospital and met up with me and made sure I was okay. And it's kind of been a process of piecing together the details of that night and that afternoon, and just seeing how it's impacted other people as well.
That is a lot to take in and a lot to process. What did you learn subsequently as you then had more medical evaluation, and as you learned what had happened at the event when you weren't conscious?
So I underwent several tests at the hospital, including a CT head scan, CT chest, and then cardiac MRI. And then I did an electrophysiology study, as well as a stress test on the treadmill. And from a medical perspective, the doctors weren't able to really find anything. They were like, wow, your heart actually looks really strong. And after years of CrossFit and your collegiate athletics career, it's very strong and very healthy. And it's kind of unexplainable as to what happened, right? And the doctor compared it to what happened to Christian Eriksen, the World Cup soccer player, who now has an ICD. And so they're like, yeah, it could be, a number of factors, but we kind of don't know. And then staying in the hospital was not fun.
How long were you there?
For 7 days.
Okay.
And because of COVID, I was only allowed a visitor at a time for an hour. And then 23 hours, I was kind of alone with my thoughts. So in terms of to answer your question, what I learned, I'm like, one, the CrossFit community is amazing because people were able to act quickly. And if I was, alone, like this podcast wouldn't be happening.
That's
which is kind of a lot to take in. But for some reason, like my mental state is pretty positive throughout all this so far.
That's incredible. Incredible. Dr. Jory, I'd love to hear your perspective as you hear Jason's story about just the response, what happened on the site, and then, any insights that you have about why this might have happened in someone who's a young, fit athlete.
Yeah. So first of all, I wanted to thank Jason for talking about this. It's not necessarily easy for everyone to talk about this. And certainly because it's been, just a matter of days since this has happened to you and you're still processing this. So thank you so much for willing to talk about this, because it really helps bring awareness to this issue. And you are in a perfect position to articulate what had happened and how to process this. So you're going to help a lot of people by verbalizing this process that you underwent. And in terms of your questions, Julie, what Jason is describing is very typical for what we see in athletes who have undergone or survived what we call sudden cardiac arrest. And it's very typical in that there may not be any prior warning signs, and the athlete may not be aware of any issues with respect to their heart function. And then all of a sudden, usually around the event or shortly after, there is an arrest. And the other term for this is sudden cardiac death if the outcome is not good. And the only thing that can ameliorate this situation when that happens is getting AED, CPR, and emergency protocols initiated, which is what happened. So in terms of the typical nature of this, usually the athletes are not aware. And this is why there's a lot of controversy in the field as to should we screen athletes before certain types of competitions. And that's what my group has been heavily involved with. We led Canada's first guideline for screening of athletes. We were focused on varsity athletes. And so we published that in the Canadian Journal of Cardiology, along with 12 other cardiologists from across Canada, looking at this issue, looking at the value of screening, and looking at the value of AED CPR protocols, as were shown to be helpful in Jason's case. The other important issue which makes this typical is how shocking this is to everyone at the gym, Jason's teammates, the coaches there, the whole CrossFit community, his parents, his family. And it would have been more devastating if the outcome had not been as good as it could be, as it was in this case. And so, unfortunately, it doesn't always turn out to be that good. Approximately 3 days ago in my community, a young lawyer passed away, and he was a triathlete, and that's publicly available knowledge. And unfortunately, his family is devastated. His whole community is devastated. His arrest occurred a few hours. We don't know whether it was clearly linked to his sporting event or not. He was training earlier that day, so I don't want to speculate. But in many cases, we do not have a good outcome. So those are my initial perspectives as to what Jason described in terms of this being fairly typical. and not knowing when this might occur, I can certainly tell you a little bit more about what are some causes in athletes. And I can certainly tell you about what we try to raise awareness about with respect to preventing sudden cardiac arrest in athletes.
That would be great. I'd love to hear about both of those things. I think, I am curious too. It sounds like in Jason's case, when he then had a thorough cardiac evaluation in the hospital, there wasn't anything identified. When you talk about screening, would he necessarily have screened positive for anything? Do we think he would have, or are there other situations where maybe, screening is more helpful?
So that's a great question. So what we think happens in cases of sudden cardiac arrest is that there is an underlying abnormality that becomes manifest during competition when there's this extra stress on the heart. So if the athlete is not putting their heart under that extra stress, it may remain quiescent, and the athlete may not know at all that they have any problems with their heart. So it only becomes unmasked with competitive exercise. And there's a number of conditions that might be unmasked in such a situation. For example, one of them is known as hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, which is thickening of the heart, and it's genetic. Another one is called arrhythmogenic right ventricular dysplasia, which is a problem with the right side of the heart, which is also genetic. Then you can get coronary anomalies that might be embryologic. So the athlete may have been born with those and they're functioning okay, but just when during competition or during those high stress situations, those anomalies may not work quite right and cause problems. And then there's also rhythm disorders that are much more difficult to detect because there's not necessarily a overt structural problem, and there's more of an electrical problem. So I don't have all of Jason's medical history. I'm not privy to that. But from what the story details sound like to me is that this probably rhythm related, because they would have done a number of tests that would look for some of the other causes which are structural, which would have been seen by the imaging tests. So, for example, I'm a specialist in echocardiography, which is cardiac ultrasound. And that's one of the things that I focus on in my clinical work, is looking for the structural problem in the athletes that I see in my clinic. I focus on in my clinic. And so sometimes there's a thought that perhaps we can do these tests prior to an athlete competing to see if we can pick up any of these abnormalities and these red flags. The problem is that all of these tests have significant costs, and there can also be false positives that lead to further cascade of testing that may not be necessary. So that's the controversy, where how many people do we have to screen in order to detect a case? And the truth of the matter is that it's very rare. Jason's case is very rare. We hear about it because it's so shocking to see in a young person, and it devastates an entire community. And so that's also a very valid reason to think about screening people. Mm-hmm. So in our screening guideline, we looked at both sides of this argument. And what we suggested was that some organizations are not resourced to do all of this testing before an athlete competes. And if we mandate that they have to do all of this, then they may not be able to support competition, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what we've proposed is more of a tiered approach where you must have foundational CPR, AED, and emergency protocols in place for an organization to promote competition. And then the next layer could be a history and physical examination that might suggest there's some abnormality requiring further testing. And so that way we kind of narrow and better target who needs screening initially, and we don't end up screening everyone with tests and worry about false positives or unnecessary testing. So it's a complicated argument. You can see why there's a bit of a debate, and it goes back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
It really speaks to personalizing the approach that's appropriate for that organization and that community.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Jason, I know you said you had a lot of time to think in the hospital, especially without being able to have a lot of visitors, a lot of time just to think and process on your own. And you, as part of that, have really developed a passion for advocating for AEDs. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. So I think, from this experience, it's about learning and proactively, doing a couple of things that I think benefit myself in terms of lifestyle, as well as, the broader community. So in terms of the broader community, I'd like to join an advocacy group to get, AEDs and CPR training in, organizations. I made sure I'm at my law firm right now. There's an AED on every floor. So that's great. Yeah. And, just joining a public advocacy group to, have AEDs at gyms and AEDs in public places. Cause it's funny, like the doctors at the hospital were like, CPR was administered on you for, 10, 12 minutes by, CrossFitters who are really strong.
Mm-hmm.
How's your chest feeling? And I was like, you know what? My chest feels fine. And they're like, yeah, definitely the AED saved your life. So that was a big takeaway for me, just to, be able to spread this message and get more knowledge and broader outreach available for people moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm, grateful for that. And for you already, as Dr. Jory mentioned, this has only happened just recently. And as you're processing all of it yourself, the fact that you're already thinking about how you can use your experience to help other people and advocate for something that's so important is really remarkable. But it's not just having the AEDs, right? I know that I'd love to hear, Dr. Jory, what the standard procedures and protocols are, but it's not so much as just having it hanging on the wall, right? It doesn't do a lot of good there. But what are the other things that we need to have in place so that if something like this does happen, we can react in the appropriate way?
Great question. So with respect to the AED and emergency protocols, I would say for box owners, make sure you have one hanging on the wall. Make sure it's accessible, it's working, it's powered properly, and so that people know where it is. And for competitors and athletes working participating in a box, just look around and know, where is it? Whenever you walk into a gym, I walked into another gym the other day and there wasn't one there, and it was a new gym. And I was thinking, okay, I have to talk to the owner and say, why don't you have one? And so it's nice that if you walk into a room or an event or even at a pitch somewhere or a field, we all can play a role, whether we're spectators watching an event, whether we're family members, whether we're athletes, or whether we're coaches. We should all be aware. And we fall into the category known as bystanders. So bystander administered AED and CPR, as in this case, is very effective. in the case of a sudden cardiac arrest. And so we can all be bystanders in that, knowing where the devices are and having 3 steps in mind what to do. The first thing that's going to do is if you see someone collapse, run and get the AED and stick it on them. You are not going to hurt the person because the AED will not shock the person unless it's a shockable rhythm. So don't worry about hurting them. The second thing you need to do is have someone help you and see if they're breathing, and see if either you or someone who knows can start CPR if necessary. And then third, call 911, right? So all those 3 things, if you remember to do those 3 things, that's what you're going to enact upon when you see someone collapse. You're just going to do that. And that takes away the uncertainty, the standing around and scratching your head. What should I do? Who's going to do what? You are going to do it. You're going to get the AED. You are going to tell someone to call 911, and you are going to check to see if the person's breathing. And certainly, if you want to get even better at that, places like Heart and Stroke Foundation offer practice protocols, and they also provide better training for provision of CPR as well. And certainly our group has put together videos, information that we've vetted, which I could provide to you in terms of links afterwards. Mm-hmm. So those would be, I would say, the take-home messages in terms of walking into a room, knowing where the AED is, quickly having a 3-step plan in your mind. You are a bystander, you're there to help, and helping to raise awareness about this issue. And part of that is what you're doing here, Julie, is having this podcast, talking about it, and hopefully we can support more research in this area and continue the conversation.
I think the point you made about all of us being bystanders is very important, because I think, as a gym member, you might think, well, the gym owner is responsible for having the AED, or the coaches, or maybe, there's some medical professionals in class, so I'll just rely on them. But you never know what the situation is going to be. And I think in that situation, it's obviously very unexpected and very stressful. And so having already played that scenario through in your mind and knowing, okay, I know these 3 steps, I'm going to get the AED, I'm going to put it on the person. I'm going to start CPR if they're not breathing, and then I'm going to call 911, and visualizing yourself doing that. Then if you find yourself in that situation, instead of freezing, you're more likely to be able to do what's necessary to help them. And, just the same as we might visualize before a competition, to visualize ourselves performing, or visualize a difficult conversation we have to have in life, or a work presentation. Visualization can be a very powerful tool. And this is just one easy example. If we, for a member of a gym, just knowing where the AED is and visualizing those steps, you never know, that could save a life someday. So mm-hmm. I appreciate you sharing all of that. And of course, wherever you are in whatever country you're listening from, there are great, resources you can all share, or certifications you can do to be more prepared if you're interested.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think the CrossFit community, or even the functional fitness community, I guess, would be very adept at this discussion because it's so community oriented. And, it'd be interesting to even put together a WOD or something that's related. Okay, run mm-hmm. to the AED, and just mentioning that. And then everyone in the world, just for 3 seconds, talks about where the AED is.
Great idea. Yeah.
WOD or something like that.
Could be a fun warm up or cool down someday.
Yeah. And it raises awareness, and it makes it okay to talk about. And I think we're a community that's open to that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, Jason, you obviously had some bystanders around you that really knew what to do in that situation. And as you mentioned, you were really overwhelmed by the response of the community who was there and who weren't there, who reached out. Can you talk a little bit more just about how important that was and what it meant?
For sure. So from what I've been able to piece together, there were so many like critical parts of that event that, it was so organized. As soon as I fell, someone was made aware, and then like the competition stopped. And people who were not medical or didn't have, CPR training were ushered outside. So the rest of the spectators were in the parking lot. And then, someone was checking my femoral pulse. Someone was, administering CPR. Someone was giving me mouth to mouth. A couple firefighters in attendance put the AED on me. And it seemed like everyone was very siloed, but working together in getting the best outcome possible, which, I'm just like so grateful that these people were in attendance. Like someone was watching over me that day, because I only in a CrossFit gym, right? Like that you're able to have such a great community of people who are working together, who, really just probably met each other for the first time that day.
Mm-hmm.
And just to help, save a life. And that it's just so amazing.
It's incredible. I just got chills as you said that. It is incredible, the CrossFit community, and just how, it reminds you. And sometimes when, the world can seem, there's so much, so many things tearing people apart, when push comes to shove and there is a real situation where someone's in danger, how people really come together and work together and really care. So it's really amazing to hear that happen in your situation.
Yeah, really amazing. And it's just so like incredible that, people were able to work together, not knowing what each person does, right, in terms of career, background, and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I'm just so grateful and blessed to be able to be here today.
Yeah. Can you share a little bit more just about your time in the hospital? And then since you've been home, you're obviously a busy person. You do CrossFit, you're a lawyer, and then all of a sudden you're sort of, forced to just sit and rest and have this very sort of earth-shattering realization. What has that time been like for you? And then as you've worked back up to, going back to work and moving a little bit more, what has that been like?
So originally at the hospital, the doctors, because they were not able to, find the root cause of what happened, they're like, Jason, as an insurance policy, you should get an ICD. And that itself was kind of earth-shattering a little bit, because I was like, I feel fine. If you want me to, do a WOD right now, I think I'm able to, and
spoken like a true CrossFit athlete.
Yeah. And I was like, I played university basketball. I've competed at regionals like this. Why do I need an ICD? So I texted my good friends who, made the introduction to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, is this ICD really necessary? And they're like, it's part of, it's an insurance policy, and you could, as a lawyer, appreciate, having a backup plan.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, you know what? Okay, I'll get the ICD. So I got the ICD, and then, work was so supportive. They're like, take as much time as you need. I like being busy, and the sudden realization, came to me. And I think this is like the hardest part of all this, not to like bring religion or anything. Like, God created me to be me, and like, you to be Julie Fouché.
Mm-hmm.
And, that was suddenly almost taken away. And whatever that means in like the biggest aspect of this thing called life, I wasn't able to, fulfill that potential that I want for myself and others want for me. Right. So I was kind of sitting at home going crazy with my thoughts. And, so I got the ICD done on May 21st, and I was back at work 2 weeks later, just because I like using my brain, being stimulated, and my colleagues are just amazing here, right? So I I wanted to come back to work, work for the clients that I work with. And so far, I haven't gone back to a CrossFit gym, but I'm itching to go back, right? So, but I'm listening to the doctors to just make sure that everything's firing properly, and I'll take my time to head back. And I can't wait to WOD again.
That's great. Well, we can't wait to see you working out again whenever the time is right and your body's ready for it.
Yeah, for sure.
You shared a really beautiful post that I read on Instagram just about how much perspective this experience gave you and how nothing is really guaranteed. How are you taking that? At least right now, obviously there's still probably a lot of reflection happening, but how are you taking that? What message do you hope to share with others that you've learned, that it seems like you have this, new sense of purpose in your life and appreciation. So what can you share about how you've learned from it and anything you'd like to share with others?
For sure. So I think, being a lawyer, you're always a little type A. I like to call lawyers in private practice insecure overachievers. So, not to sweat the small stuff, and I think part of this was always showing to me that developing relationships is such a key part of this journey of life, right? People reached out to me to make sure I was okay. I hadn't talked to them in 15, almost sometimes 20 years, right? So from my teenage years, but they had heard that something had happened to me, and everyone was so supportive. So I want to continue cultivating relationships and being able to travel, being able to participate in the gym, living a healthy lifestyle, all that stuff contributes to my mental well-being and my ability to progress and develop myself. So that's something that I'll never take for granted ever again. So that's a huge takeaway from this whole incident.
That's beautiful. Really, reprioritizing what's most important.
Yeah, for sure. And I really enjoy practicing law. So that was something that I wanted to come back to right away, because I enjoy being the trusted advisor to a business, or working collegially with my colleagues to get a deal done. So I think part of that's just my innate competitiveness, but also I like being mentally stimulated. So that I was you know what, I could do this with an ICD in my chest.
That's great. Anything else that you'd like to add, Dr. Jory?
No, I just thought I would mention for some of your listeners that might not know what an ICD is, which is a implantable cardioverter defibrillator. And it's like a little pacemaker that's placed under Jason's left clavicle. And it has a wire that reaches down to the heart. And the way it works is that if he has another episode, it delivers a shock right then and there. And so that's the insurance policy that we're talking about with respect to its similarity to an AED. He's walking around with his own little mini personalized AED device now. And so it's a challenge, because we don't necessarily want to put AEDs in everybody, because there is some maintenance involved in terms of making sure they're working throughout a lifetime, and doing battery checks and looking at the readouts. But it's very easy to manage. So, and I don't think Jason's going to have any issues with that. And it's nice that he's able to talk about that, and people can sort of normalize that with people having AED. So I just wanted to provide that information. In terms of your question about adding anything else, as I said before, I think it would be great if we could continue to talk about cardiovascular health in athletes in general. I think it's important. There's an important crossover with mental health as well, and how to encourage the younger generation, especially who have gone through the pandemic, to continue in sport and exercise, but how do we do it safely? And so that's why I think this conversation is very important, where we want to encourage more sport, more athletes, more CrossFit, and we want to encourage safety.
I love it. Wonderful. Well, before we wrap up, I want to finish with 3 questions I ask everyone at the end of the podcast. So we'll rapid fire these for both of you. The first one is, what are the 3 things you do on a regular basis that have the biggest positive impact on your health? Either one of you can go first.
Go ahead, Jason.
The 3 things.
Put you on the spot.
I would say CrossFit.
Thing, right?
CrossFit. 2 is like a routine. I like to, have a routine, and, whether that's waking up and going to bed. And then the 3rd is just making like smart choices when eating.
Mm-hmm.
But I also, don't sweat eating like cake and cookies and desserts, because I love desserts.
You still enjoy yourself from time to time. That's good.
Exactly.
Wonderful. How about you, Dr. Jory?
So yeah, you can imagine I have kind of a very high stress environment. And so it's important to make sure you don't burn out and have a nice balance. And so that's why I exercise, and I'm part of the Queen Street Fitness group with Storm and Callum. And I try to keep up with the young people like Jason there. It's very hard. My CrossFit club is near a university. It's in a university district. So I'm one of the old people there, and I'm competing against these people.
That's awesome, though. I love it. I always think that's one of the coolest things about CrossFit affiliates is, maybe you have students who you're working out alongside, and it breaks down some of those barriers.
Is that Dr. Jory? What's he doing here? So it's a funny dynamic sometimes, and some of my students are competing there, and some of my master's students as well. So I think that that leads to the second thing is the interactivity with networking and friends. I think, for example, tomorrow I'm leaving for Seattle, and I'm doing a special session with the American Society of Echo, where we will be talking about how to do ultrasound in athletes. So this is great.
Awesome. Good timing.
Yeah, great timing, actually. So, and that's going to be, attended by a global audience. So being part of something bigger, being part of a network, and in tune with the pulse of new discoveries in science, I think really keeps me motivated and feeling healthy. And then finally, I've been developing this passion for gardening.
Oh, I love it.
I don't know where that has come from, but I could take a week of vacation and just work on my property and garden and work the land. So
that's amazing. What are your favorite things to grow?
Well, I really like planting trees. So this spring I planted 8 Newport plums. So we can't get cherry blossoms to grow here in Kingston. It's a little bit too cold. So Newport plums are supposed to be the next best thing. And just, looking at landscaping and flowers and that kind of stuff.
I love it. That's awesome. Next question is, what is one thing you think would have an impact on your health, a big impact on your health, but you have a hard time implementing it, or something you're working on?
For me, when I work late, like pushing through an agreement, like eating out. So maybe just being smarter with like packing food and things like that, because the people downstairs definitely know who I am. Yeah.
I think we're all guilty of that. It's unless you plan ahead, it's hard, especially late at night.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think for me, as I'm getting older, I'm finding recovery a little bit more difficult, and I think some of the masters athletes might relate to that. I didn't think it would happen to me, but it's happening. And so, really remembering to get more sleep and sleep hygiene, I think would really be helpful in terms of all of my goals right now.
Mm-hmm. Love that. Love that. Last question is, what does a healthy life look like to you?
Being able to do the things I love, being able to interact with the people I love, being able to pursue my passions, but with modifications as like time goes on. So that's something, like, because life is short, I'm able to pursue all the things I would like to pursue within reason.
I love it.
And so for me is this interesting intersection between work and fun that has been developing in my career. So, as a cardiologist, I'm very interested in vascular health, but I've been developing this interest in athletes' health. And that's been growing, and it's this crossover between work and fun that has really been stimulating, and it is a nice balance and keeps me motivated.
I love it. Wonderful. Well, thank you both again so much for taking the time. Jason, particularly again for sharing your story. Something that is obviously very heavy and so few people have experienced, but thank you for sharing with us, especially in such a vulnerable time, and being such an advocate. I think that what I'm taking away from this is something very simple that all of us can do, just being a little bit more educated, learning about where the AEDs are in our environment and what we might do in an emergency situation can really go a long way. So thank you for being here. Thank you, Dr. Jory, for sharing your expertise as well about athletes and about using AEDs. And I really appreciate the time.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much for tuning in. If you enjoy listening to the podcast, please consider subscribing and giving it a 5-star rating on iTunes. It really does help to get the word out to more people.